It is now time to move on to the next item of business, which is an urgent question. I am going to allow a moment or two for the Cabinet Secretary to re-enter the chamber, and I will use this time to reiterate to all members that all business is follow-on business, and therefore assumptions should not be made that the time on the paper is the time. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I have had to delay business momentarily, and I'd be grateful if you would take your seat as swiftly as possible. I call on Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will publish the consultation on its proposal to reduce the automatic early release point for certain short-term prisoners from 40% to 30% of their sentence, including details of how and when responses can be submitted.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, and apologies to you and to the Chamber. The answer in short to Mr Kerr's question is yes. Yesterday, after informing Parliament of my intention to consult on changes to the automatic early release point for certain short-term prisoners from 40% to 30% of their sentence as required by legislation, the Scottish Government wrote to a range of relevant stakeholders inviting their views on these proposals. I have today shared that letter and a list of recipients with members of the Criminal Justice Committee for publication. Alongside this, my officials have engaged with key delivery partners, and I personally met with victims' organisations on the proposed changes.
Liam Kerr.
Presiding Officer, this consultation is because next week an instrument will be laid which automatically releases prisoners after they've served less than a third of their sentence. So someone sentenced to just under 4 years for a violent offence such as a knife attack would be released at 14 months, or rather, for every 10 days of sentence, only 3 will actually be served in prison. Does the Cabinet Secretary really think a consultation of 3 working days is appropriate for a change of this magnitude? And in any event, does she think it's acceptable, really, to ask Parliament to sanction the release of criminals in prison based on what is, her letter to the committee acknowledges, a box-ticking exercise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, there is no such thing as a box-ticking exercise. I do, of course, have to acknowledge that the consultation by necessity is short, and that is because further action is required. And I'm also very mindful of parliamentary scrutiny. This Parliament will rise in the not-too-distant future. And, of course, the SSI, I wish to have its 40 days to process, because given the magnitude of the issue, I do, of course, value very much parliamentary scrutiny. We will, of course, take account of all views. This consultation builds on previous work done, particularly in terms of the passage of the 2025 Act, and there is also ongoing engagement between myself and stakeholders and my officials, as you would expect.
Liam Kerr.
Officer, the true folly of this ill-informed, knee-jerk, unplanned early release of prisoners is writ large in government figures, showing that nearly half of ex-prisoners are back inside for further crimes within a year. So the question is that when the Cabinet Secretary says she will take account of all the views, if victims and victims' organisations responding to this consultation overwhelmingly oppose these plans to let prisoners out after only a third of their sentence, will the Cabinet Secretary pause this rush to legislate and rethink, or will she just carry on regardless?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as Mr Kerr well knows, that at times, sometimes you can't duck action, and for the sake of our communities and indeed the Scottish Prison Service, sticking your head in the sand is not an option. I have outlined to Chamber in full detail the situation currently faced by our Scottish Prison Service. And in terms of Mr Kerr's point on reconviction rates, that of course points to the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of short-term custodial sentences, when we know by the evidence that community sentencing, such as community payback orders, are much more effective in reducing reoffending. So right now, I am focused on building a consensus based on evidence of what will work at the end of the day to keep our communities safe.
Thank you. Let's hear one another. There's much interest, and I'd like to enable as many members as possible to put a question. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak further on how the Scottish Government is ensuring that important safeguards are in place to protect the public and victims, whilst also taking the necessary actions to aid in relieving the pressures on the Scottish Prison Service?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, protecting victims and public safety remains an absolute priority, which is why the proposed changes have exclusions built in, so that serving sentences, or those serving sentences for domestic abuse and sexual offences of any length, are automatically excluded. And I recognise fully that victims, families and victim support organisations will have concerns, which is why I have met with victim support organisations personally and remain committed to continuing to engage with them on this important issue. And should the proposals be agreed by Parliament, the Scottish Government and the Scottish Prison Service will work directly with victim support organisations to raise awareness of this proposal and encourage those who are eligible to sign up to the victim notification schemes, and those who are part of this scheme will be automatically notified about any change in release for the prisoner in their case.
Pauline McNeill.
So it appears as though in a few days' time Scotland will move to short-term prisoners who will serve 30% of their sentence on a permanent basis for all time. So let's be clear about that. But I want to try and understand what that means and why the Government thinks it's necessary to meet the issues that the Cabinet Secretary talks about. So yesterday she said that this Parliament agreed to change the release point for short-term prisoners from 50 to 40%. That was just over a year ago, and that this change was predicted to result in approximate 5% sustained reduction across the sentenced population, if no change, compared to where no change was made. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us before this consultation what effect that reduction has had from 50 to 40%? And can I presume that some projections have been made based on this other suggestion to reduce to 30%? Because if they can't tell us today, then what is the point of doing it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, can I thank Ms McNeill for her question, and can I start by reminding her of the commitment that I gave to Audrey Nicholl yesterday, that while in terms of pursuing secondary legislation we can't have that statutory review, I made a very clear political commitment here yesterday to the Chamber as a whole that we would indeed review any reduction, if Parliament agrees to the automatic early release point to 30%, that would be reviewed in the same way as if it was in primary legislation. And I put on record the reasons why I think that is important. In terms of the predicted outcome of this proposal, the reduction of this would be from between 239 to 312 individuals. And the benefit of this measure is that it helps with a sustained reduction, in the same way that the previous STP 40 reduced the population from what it would otherwise have been. Whereas when we change the automatic early release point, that has a sustained impact, whereas we all know that early emergency release, while necessary, is a temporary impact.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland is in a similar position to Europe, where half the countries exceed 100% prison occupancy. Many are considering alternatives. In 2021, Kosovo agreed to take 300 Danish prisoners at similar cost to housing prisoners in Scottish jails. Sweden, Estonia and Belgium are exploring similar schemes. The Scottish Prison Service has 653 foreign nationals in custody. Many, including 94 Albanians, would be closer to family if housed in Kosovo. Given the European Convention on Human Rights already features prominently in Kosovan law, will the Cabinet Secretary commit to exploring a similar scheme to help reduce Scotland's foreign national prison population and free up space in our jails?
I will just say, to the extent to which this refers to the substantive question, and just to remind members that questions should be on the same subject matter. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just for information, I am considering what further action can be taken within our devolved remit, and the SPS regularly engages with the UK Government to identify the foreign national offenders who are eligible for removal from prisons in Scotland. As a matter of fact, we support coordination of prisoner transfer arrangements between the UK and other international jurisdictions. However, we do not have the powers to replicate the proposals outlined by the UK Government for the removal of more foreign national offenders, as returns and deportations are matters that are entirely reserved. I previously shared, either think in Chamber or in Committee, the number of UK borders agencies that are allocated by the UK Government to work across the UK and Northern Ireland. That figure is around 50 plus, but I have to say that the numbers supporting this work in Scotland are particularly low, and from memory they are about 4 borders agencies officers, but I will write to the member with the accurate facts.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary failed to answer Liam Kerr's question, so let me repeat it. If the consultation, which lasts 3 days, comes back against the Cabinet Secretary's proposals, will she abandon her plans or press ahead regardless?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think that is a particularly disingenuous question. Sorry, well, I'm entitled, Presiding Officer, am I not, to be able to share my opinion and give my view to this Chamber and indeed to Mr Ross. Consultation is crucially important, Presiding Officer. But as this Parliament knows, and this member will know, at the end of the day, it will be parliamentarians that will have to vote and decide on the merits or otherwise of the regulations that I bring forward. And I look forward to the debate from Mr Kerr in particular about what their solutions are to our prison population, because we all remember
Let's hear one another.
We all remember what the previous UK government done when they released 10,000 prisoners without any leave to parliamentary accountability or transparency.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, President Officer. I am slightly confused of the point of this consultation, but if we are consulting, Cabinet Secretary tell me, is she consulting with local authorities and with homelessness charities in regard to where these individuals coming out of prison will be housed? We know that within this region, particularly of Lothian, there is a housing crisis. There is no accommodation for people. Where will they sleep when they're released from prison?
On the substantive question,
yes,
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Mr Balfour raises an important point, and if I can draw his attention, and I will make sure he gets a copy of the correspondence that I have sent to the Criminal Justice Committee both yesterday and today, and in Annex A of the letter I've sent to Criminal Justice Committee today details those who we are required to consult with in terms of the legislation, and also the other delivery partners, some of which he has mentioned, that we will also consult with, and will be looking at their views with all seriousness and consideration. And I note the point that he raises around supporting delivery partners, particularly in and around housing.
Thank you. That concludes the urgent question in the name of Liam Kerr. We move to the next urgent question. I call Finlay Carson.
What immediate action it will take in light of the concerns raised by the Patient Safety Commissioner at the meeting of the Health, Social Care and Sports Committee on the 3rd of February regarding transparency and risk mitigation in relation to maternity services in Wigtownshire?
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I recognise the real strength of feeling on this matter. I also thank the Patient Safety Commissioner for her work to amplify the voices of patients. Her comments to the committee were very important, particularly her comments about the need for women who feel vulnerable when giving birth to know they will be supported and safe. I am concerned if patients do not feel they are getting the communication they need, and I note the Commissioner said she will be meeting soon with leaders from NHS Dumfries and Galloway to discuss her concerns. The Commissioner is, of course, also a member of the Government's new Maternity and Neonatal Services Task Force, which has now met. As Mr Carson will recall, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care wrote to him on the 20th of November 2025 following his attendance at a meeting held by ministers with the Galloway Community Hospital Action Group and representatives of Dumfries and Galloway Integration Joint Board and NHS Dumfries and Galloway on the 15th of October 2025. In this letter, the Cabinet Secretary outlined the controls NHS Dumfries and Galloway have in place to prevent adverse effects and manage risk. This includes a clinical risk assessment tool which is completed at every antenatal visit and supports the identification of individual risk factors for women during the antenatal period. If Mr Carson is content, I will share this letter with the Scottish Patient Safety Commissioner.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Minister for that response. But, Presiding Officer, for almost a decade, mothers, campaigners and politicians from right across this chamber have raised concerns about patient choice and safety in Wigtownshire. Health Minister after Health Minister, including Jenny Minto and Marie Todd, have said that they've listened. But the truth is this: they may well have listened, yet they have failed to act. Given what the Patient Safety Commissioner has now told us, can the Minister explain why this situation has been allowed to drift on for so long? And does the Minister understand why so many people fear this will yet again become another failure under the SNP's watch, like the Wishaw maternity and the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital tragedies, where whistleblowers are shunned, nothing is done, no lessons are learned, and families are left to pay the price?
Minister.
I thank Mr Carson for his supplementary question. As Mr Carson is aware, decisions on maternity services are made by the Health Board that represents that footprint. However, in recognition of the Healthcare Improvement Scotland reports on NHS hospital maternity services, we have established the Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, which is exactly set up to look at a number of the issues that Mr Carson has highlighted. I am very pleased that the Patient Safety Commissioner is part of that group to ensure that the voices of service users are heard clearly, and I'm very pleased that as well as patient voices, we are also hearing very clearly about rural and island situations as well, which I hope will go some way to respond to Mr Carson's question.
Finlay Carson.
Thank the Minister for a response, but it doesn't give me any confidence. It's simply not good enough. As you are well aware, in 2024, independent clinical advice recommended reinstatement of midwife-led births in Wigtownshire. Yet the IGB overturned that despite strong local support and the continued risk of long journeys for women in labour. Around the same time, decisions were taken to replace cottage hospitals in Newton Stewart and Kirkcudbright without first identifying where step-down or palliative care beds would go, ignoring clear public preferences and leaving rural families with even fewer local options. Given this pattern of independent recommendations identified but then rejected, and public views set aside, beds removed without alternatives, and now the Patient Safety Commissioner warning of gaps in care and unclear risk mitigation, does the Government accept that NHS Dumfries and Galloway has reached the threshold for Stage 4 escalation? And if not, why not?
Minister.
Thank Mr Carson for his questions. And as Mr Carson will know, there are processes in place to consider these matters, especially around escalation. As Mr Carson will know, NHS Dumfries and Galloway is currently escalated to level 3 for finance, and Level 2 for mental health, to allow the Scottish Government, to monitor things such as CAMHS. As Mr Carson noted in his letter to the Cabinet Secretary, previously the Government has not been afraid of escalating health boards where it is deemed necessary. As I've said, there are processes in place that need to be considered, and this is always kept under consideration.
Thank you. There is much interest. Concise questions and responses will enable more members an opportunity. I call Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I firstly commend the ongoing and tireless work of the Galloway Community Hospital Action Group in campaigning to reinstate maternity services at Galloway Community Hospital and ensure a sustainable future for the hospital embedded in the community. At the committee yesterday, which I was at, and asked the Patient Safety Commissioner questions in relation to this, the Commissioner was clearly unhappy that the detailed information she requires and requested from NHS D&G was not provided in the first instance, instead requiring further meetings and time to do so. So can I ask the Minister what discussions she will be having with NHS D&G to ensure that they are taking their responsibility both for patient safety and for openness with professionals and the public seriously?
Minister.
I thank Emma Harper for her question, and I too have watched the evidence that the Patient Safety Commissioner gave yesterday to committee. The Cabinet Secretary has been pleased to meet with the Patient Safety Commissioner, Karen Titchener, and will continue to do so. Following the meeting, my officials contacted NHS Dumfries and Galloway, and I understand that they have now shared the information. The Commissioner may also raise matters with the Cabinet Secretary as they arise. I was pleased to welcome Ms Titchener as a member of the Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, which I chair and which had its first meeting last week. I have stressed how important it is to have the voices of maternity service users in the task force.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Concerns have also been raised about the maternity unit at Crosshouse University Hospital, with Healthcare Improvement Scotland finding it fell short of standards in 16 areas. These issues keep happening across Scotland and we need action now. What discussions has the Minister had with the Chief Executive of NHS Scotland about this, and can she tell us if the National Review of Maternity Care announced last year has started, if there is an escalation procedure to ensure issues found are dealt with immediately, and when will this review conclude?
In relation to the substantive question.
I thank Sharon Dowie for her question. With regards to the Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, as I said earlier, that had its first meeting last week, and it has been currently set up to ensure that we can review and look at evidence as to the situation within maternity health care. I meet regularly with the DG of NHS in Scotland, and also today myself and the Cabinet Secretary met with Ayrshire and Arran to discuss the report that Healthcare Improvement Scotland have just released on Crosshouse Hospital.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Patient Safety Commissioner made clear that those with lived experience are not being listened to, and that the Health Board has failed to reassure and support patients. Patient safety should be our #1 priority. We need to think, where is the safety in turning women away in early labour to drive 70 miles home, and where is the safety in women leaving maternity services with PTSD? And that is what women are telling us. They're telling us lives are at risk and something needs to change. And the Patient Safety Commissioner raised these concerns in a committee of this Parliament. So in light of these real concerns of the community and the important evidence from the Patient Safety Commissioner in this Parliament, what leadership will the Minister show to ensure that services are made safe? Women need action and not more reports.
Minister.
I thank Carol Mockin for her question and agree that the evidence that we heard from the Patient Safety Commissioner was very powerful yesterday. Delivering safe and effective care to maternity service users is of utmost importance to the Scottish Government. I've already laid out in previous answers that the Cabinet Secretary meets regularly with the Patient Safety Commissioner. She is a key member of the Maternity and Neonatal Task Force that I chair, and I will ensure that conversations and these questions, which are now all on the public record, are shared directly, and we will respond to them clearly alongside the Patient Safety Commissioner.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. A declaration of interest. I have a daughter who is a midwife. This afternoon I came from the manifesto launch of the Royal Society of Midwives, aptly titled Safe Staffing Equals Safe Care. What they say is the government are painting a picture that they do not recognise. They talk of burnout, they talk of staff shortages, they even talk about still having no meals available overnight, having no breaks. And despite actually highlighting these things, they're being asked to do more and more with less and less resource, obviously putting patients at risk. So why did it take the Safety Commissioner's intervention to raise these concerns?
Minister.
Thank Brian Whittle for his question, and would suggest that the Scottish Government had already recognised that, with the requirement of Healthcare Improvement Scotland to go and do these reviews. I think that's incredibly important to ensure that we have the information from the inspections that are going on. We have had a listening exercise with maternity staff. I recognise, and one of the consistent responses within the Healthcare Improvement Scotland reviews is safe staffing level, and that is what I am focused on during the work that we are doing with the Maternity and Neonatal Task Force.
And Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister accept that, in light of the Patient Safety Commissioner's concerns, that residents right across Dumfries and Galloway will now rightly be concerned if the Health Board is unable to show what risk mitigations have been put in place for decisions around maternity services? Where else might patient safety be being compromised, and where else is governance lacking? And don't the mounting problems that the Health Board now faces across a range of areas, from financial sustainability to A&E waiting times, to step-down care, to CAMS and maternity services, is it not now time that the Health Board is escalated to Stage 4 of the National Support and Intervention Framework?
With reference to the substantive question.
Thank Craig Hoy for his question. With regard to escalation, I've already responded to his colleague Finlay Carson with regards to that. As I also said in an earlier response, my understanding is that the Health Board have provided the Patient Safety Commissioner with the responses, with the evidence that she requested, and a meeting will be taking place between herself and the Health Board imminently.